Good evening, everyone. We are continuing on our study in the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers now continue on from where we left off. Remember, last week we were told that they wanted to go through the land of Edom, the land of the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and they were flatly rejected. And so they turned around and they arrived at Mount Hor. And there we saw the recording of the death of Aaron. Now, this is where the narrative continues. They are now at the southern side of Edom, and at the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And so the narrative starts: a king of Arad, the Canaanite, who dwelt in the south, heard that Israel was coming on the road to Atarim. Now, this idea of Atarim uh, really is the area where they sent the spies earlier on. That would have been, well, 40 years earlier, right? 40 years earlier. Because last week begins our 40th year of the wanderings. King of Arad is now a king of the Canaanite. He took on this area and he lived here in the south. And so they became perennial enemies of Israel. He fought against Israel, took some of them prisoners. Now, verse 2. So Israel made a vow. In this sense, this would be a solemn promise, right? A solemn promise to God. Now, I need to be a little careful in how this is expressed. I know the English says it very simply here. He says, if you, and with you means God, if God will indeed deliver this people into my hand, my would be Israel. Now it's a nation talking, right? It's Israel. Deliver means to give. So you understand this in that relationship with God, when God brings the Israelites around and God says, I will give you the land, then they will be victorious eventually, but they have to fight for it. And so they are making a promise because they have lost some Israelites, because the king Arad, right here, took prisoners of some of them when they were fighting against Israel. Now, it says here, I will utterly destroy their cities. And this is where I think we need to pay a little attention. I would still be Israel. And this word destroy has two meanings. One is to destroy, and understand that this word here is in the Hifil. And you find that in the Hifil, it would be to exterminate. It would also be to consecrate. Now, this is where we have to understand. In most of the translations, they would say destroy. But this word comes from the word haram. Haram actually means to completely wipe out and bring to ruin, or to consecrate. I think consecrate is a good word, because when they go and conquer the place, there is no reason for them to completely make the place into ruins, right? That's what the word actually means: exterminate and bring down to the ground. And what you find is that when they actually conquer places, they will take over the place to live in. But if they had wiped it down to the ground, they have to rebuild the place, which will take a lot of time. And so the word here is better used as consecrate or set apart, meaning they would take it over and let it be part of their use instead of for the use of the king of Arad. That would be, in my opinion, a better word to express. Now, there are many words in Hebrew that has a positive meaning and also a negative meaning. And so the negative meaning would be completely wipe out and fully destroy the place. And the positive meaning means once you're in there, you would take over to make sure that it's well kept for their own use. And in so doing, the Lord listened or heard, right? This is the word here, the voice of Israel and gave. Now, this word is gave, is to give. Exactly with this, to deliver, to give. Gave up the city of the Canaanites, and they, now this word here says they utterly destroyed. It's not the case, right? It's not the case. The word here, I believe, should be they actually consecrated. No, how should we say? Okay, they utterly destroyed them as a people, but they actually consecrated their cities, meaning they took over their dwelling places. And so the name of the place was called Homar. Now, this word comes from the word Haram, right? Haram is also the word Horma. Now, I can't show you all the Hebrew, but these are the root words for the name Horma right here. Horma is here. The word haram is also this word here, and also this word here. All right. And so this whole passage has to do with a play of the words of haram, and it means to exterminate or consecrate. And I believe it is better used as consecrate, right? Consecrate. And so this was their first engagement before they enter into the north and bypassing Edom. Verse 4, and then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea. Let me I think most of us may not be aware, but in case you are, this word here, Red Sea, is Yam Suf. Although the English calls it Red Sea, the Hebrew name is Yam Suf, or the Sea of Reeds, whatever the Suf may mean. And so they went down by the way of the sea to go around the land of Edom. Remember, it is to go around the land of Edom. So let me just try to visualize this with you. If this was the Red Sea, and this is the Dead Sea, we are now here, right? Mount Hor is probably here. They wanted to go up, and they fought with the first king, which is Arad, right? Arad. And that's where we had problems. And so what they did was to come down here and turn up, because right here is Edom. And they're not supposed to go through Edom. So they went around Edom. That is most likely how the way it is described. Now, in the next few verses, I want all of us to be aware that this piece of road here is very difficult to walk, right? Very difficult. This is the King's Highway, which Edom did not allow them to pass through. So let's continue with the text. As we continue with the text, we can now see this. And then the soul of the people. The soul of the people is the nephesh, right? The nephesh. The breath of the people, the character of the people, they became very discouraged. Now, the word discouraged, how should we say? The soul of the people became, the Hebrew word is short. And what would be a good way of, it's vexed, right? Short-tempered, right? Short-tempered. What else? Impatient, yes. I think impatient is good. Impatient. They were impatient. They were very short-fused. That would be the word discouraged here. On the way for them to walk. And so the people is described here as that they spoke against God and against Moses. And so let's understand this. The people, and the word spoke comes from the word davar, and it's a very common word. In all the prophet books, God davar against the nations. And here, the people davar against God. So this is about complaint. Something they don't like. And they complain against God and against Moses. And they see Moses as a representation of God. And so in that sense, they are trying to come back and say, why are we here? That's generally how the text is going. It says, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Now, understand this word up. The Egypt itself is lower. And this wilderness is higher. And so that is why the word up is used. It's about the geographical terrain. And so why did you bring us up here to end our lives? To die is to end their lives in this wilderness. For there's no food, no water. And look at the final complaint, which is actually the highlight. It says, our soul, the nephesh, and it says, loathes this worthless bread. The word loathe here means they feel sick. Okay, feel sick. I think that would be a good way of expressing. They are feeling sick. They are disgusted. Disgusted. And it says this is a worthless bread. Worthless as in, how should we say? Insubstantial. Insubstantial. It is light. And worthless is not because you can't sell it for money. That's not what it means by worthless here. And so they are looking at the manna. that they have, or the man. What is it? And you need to understand that it is light, meaning it floats down. It is not heavy like meat that you can chew and swallow, and you feel full by your stomach expanding. Um, and, and and there was a place where I read about the understanding of this mana or man here, or the man, is that it doesn't allow them to what do you call it, to excrete. So once it's in the stomach, it is absorbed into the blood, so that they get the nourishment instantly. Once you put it into the mouth, it has the magic of tasting whatever you want it to taste like. And so that is a very mysterious bread that when you eat it, you can make it taste anything you want as you can think of it. And once it's eaten into the body will absorb it without it being excreted. It is that kind of a lightness. So in that sense, it's not excreted, and so it disappears into the body. And so they call this a light bread. Insubstantial because they can't bite and chew on it. And so the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Now we need to just expand this a little bit. And so when they complained about Moses, why did you do this? They forgot. Can you imagine? They actually saw 10 miracles of plagues in Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. And throughout that 40 years, now it's throughout 39 years at least, right? They have had water from the rock. They have had manna. They had quail. And yet at this point in time, when the going is tougher, yes. And I mentioned to you, once you go around Edom, the footpath, well, it's not a natural terrain for people to walk in. And so they are now short-tempered, short-fused, and the moment it snapped, they went after Moses and thereby after God, because Moses represents God to the people. And so immediately you can see that God judged. One of the things that we see in the Jewish thinking is this: when you have the ability to see firsthand what God has done, and when you are there in the wilderness to see firsthand what God is doing, and yet you disbelieve God and make such complaints against God, so the judgment came down because you are blaspheming against God. When you complain against God, when He is just, when He is loving, He has provided, and yet you turn around and say that He is no good, He is useless, He cannot do anything, He brought us out here to die, that is how serious the charge is. God would consider this a form of blasphemy. And you know what happens to blasphemy, right? In the book of Leviticus, blasphemy is to be killed. There is no forgiveness for blasphemy. So this is not blasphemy, but it's like blasphemy. You're saying something that is not true about God. And so God sent fiery serpents. Now, what do you mean by fiery serpents? Two things here. In verse 6, the word is actually nachashim, and it also has the word seraphim. And so it comes from two words. This is fire. This is snakes. So this is with reference to God sending fiery snakes. Now, in Genesis chapter 3, there is a snake in the Garden of Eden, and it is there as a test for the man and the woman. And here, the snake is now used as an instrument of judgment. Now, the word fire here comes in two forms that we can understand. That when they bite, the venom would burn in the body. That's one. Number two, the color of the snakes is fiery color, right? Very much like copper among the people. And when they bite, the venom goes in, it burns them up, and then they die. Now, this is what happens. The serpents bite, and then they die. It doesn't take long for them to die. And that is what is implicated in the text here. The fiery serpents of color and of the poison, when they bite, it is excruciatingly painful and very venomous, and the people died shortly thereafter. Now, verse 7, when the judgment came, the people stood up. The people came to Moses. This is a realization of error. They have done wrong. And so this is what they said. We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. And so it says, we have made a mistake. This is khatat. Right? Khatat. And the reason is because of complaints. Because we have complained against God, of all people, against God, against you. So complaining against Moses is equivalent to complaining against God. And whatever God has done, and when people complain about it, it demonstrates an irreverence. Is that, no, why did God do that? Why should we do this? Or why is it like this? And when God does it, we have got to accept the fact that God is just, God is fair, and God is loving. And while we think of it that way, then no one should question God in that sense. So when God clearly did what he did, no one is there to question God. And so speaking up against Moses, when God told Moses where to go, is really speaking up against God. And so they came back to Moses and said, pray to God that he take away the serpents from us. So Moses interceded for the people. So the word pray is to intercede. Intercede. So on behalf, and this one is intercede on behalf of the people. That the people didn't pray, the people came and turned back to God. They didn't leave, but once they saw that they were dying, whoever led the complaints that the manna is useless, is worthless, is light, it's not what they want, yet after they've eaten all of it and make complaints, it means that they are ungrateful, right? They are ungrateful. That's the complaint against God. And so what did they ask? The interesting thing is they recommended God that he take away the serpents from us. What was the purpose of the serpent? The serpents was the judgment, right? This is important. It is a judgment. When God executes a judgment, can God take away the judgment? And the answer is no. When a judgment is meted out, it will be there until it serves the finality of its purpose. So when God prayed for the people, he was seeking forgiveness, right? Forgiveness. Because the people came back to Moses and to God, says, ask God to stop because we're wrong. That would be how we will understand this, because they admitted that they had sinned. And that would be an indication of a repentance, because they came back to Moses, who represents God. And so asking him to pray, speak to God, the judge, right? Speak to God, the judge, who have judged us, and take away the judgment. And obviously, God cannot do that. And so what did God say to Moses? Now, God will forgive them. The Lord said to Moses, make a fiery. Now, this word, make a fiery, in verse 8, this word fiery actually means serpent, right? Make a serpent. And this one is seraph, make a seraph, a fiery snake, and set it on a pole, which means that it will be high up. It is important for us to realize it's not looking down, but looking up, right? Looking up. And that it shall be that everyone who is bitten and he looks at it, he shall live. Now, this is really a condition. This is a condition. So first of all, you have to be bitten. Secondly, you have to look at it. And the result would be remain alive. Now that is what it means. It's not to become alive. They are already alive, but they will stay alive. And that would be the consequence. So it is a conditional solution. The remedy for this sin is to make a fiery. That's all God said. Make a fiery, make a seraph, right? And put it on a pole. And so what happened is Moses made, and it says here, Nachash, and the word serpent here is Nachash. And the word bronze here is Nechoshet, right? Nechoshet. And these are two similar words of the nun, the nun, the chet, and the shin. The nun, the chet, and the shin. And these two words carry the same root. And so you put it on a pole. And why is it called bronze? I think a better word here would be copper. What's the difference between copper and bronze? Bronze means it's an alloy, right? Bronze is an alloy. And the alloy would be copper and tin. Where it is purely copper, both are exactly the same word. And this is most likely the word copper, because that's what you can dig from the ground. And there is a copper mine in the southern part of Israel, in the Negev, that appears to be King Solomon's mines, copper mines, right? And that would be a copper-looking serpent. It's like a fiery serpent, and he placed it on a pole. And this was what happened. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, he looked at the bronze serpent and he continued to live. And so what has happened here is God judged. And the judgment is death. Not immediate death, but close enough. God saved as a solution the bronze serpent. Okay, maybe not the bronze serpent, the copper serpent. And then look so that you will live. This is the solution. Now, what is a lesson that we can take away from here is this. When God judges, he does not take away the judgment, because removing the judgment will make God unjust. Because they had sinned and they had to pay the price. And those who haven't died yet have a chance to live. But they have to trust God in the solution. And the solution is the copper serpent, or in the text here, the bronze serpent, high up on a pole, which means that when you are bitten, you need to look up. That the salvation comes from up and not down. That's one way of looking at it. And the promise of God is that if you follow his rules, you will live. And so let me put it back here again. God's judgment, God's rules. And to resolve that judgment is not to remove that judgment, but to provide a remedy for the judgment. All right. So there is a sin that we know. And the sin here is that they have complained against God. And the judgment is death. The fiery serpents would bite and they would be so painful, and very shortly they will die. And so God told Moses to make a copper serpent, put it right on top, so that anyone who is bitten, so if you're not bitten, you don't care. Why? Because you are alive. If you are bitten, you are about to die. And so the solution is not to offer a sacrifice. And so this is one of those occasions where things are so serious with God that this has nothing to do with clean or unclean. This has nothing to do with Leviticus chapters 1-7. This has nothing to do with offering. This has nothing to do with sacrifices. This has nothing to do with temple or tabernacle rituals. This has to do with the nation of Israel in the wilderness. And they actually, sort of blaspheme against God, calling God out for what they were short-tempered about. The road was difficult, and they called that God had brought them out here to die. And that is not true. And so saying something about God that is not true is like blasphemy. And the judgment is death. And here God sent. It's not Moses who did it. It was God who sent. Out of nowhere, fiery serpents bite, die. And so the rules for engaging Israel for salvation here would be to look up, not just to look, but to look up. Yes, they have to look. Look means what? It is visual. It is not in the heart, it is visual. It is not in the mind, it's not a figment of imagination. And remember what I told you about the Hebrew people, very concrete. You have to look at something. So you have to look and see it for yourself. But when you lift up your head to look at it, it shows that you are trusting God at his word. You are following God's rules. And what is the conclusion? You look, you live. You obey, you live. It's not for them now to ask, why like that? Like, why did you bring us out into the wilderness? It is, what else do you want us to do, God? Because you are the great and awesome God. They needed a life-changing lesson, and that's where we have it. Now, we will move rather quickly from here on, so we will not be too detailed. Because this is a narrative. In verse 10, they continue to move on. And move on means move north, right? Move north. Around Edom. And so as they continue to move up, they came to Ovot. And they went from Ovot and camped at this new place called in verse 11. It's actually Iye Ha'avarim, right? Iye Ha'avarim. It is somewhere in the wilderness. We don't know much about all these places today, right? It's just that they are traveling north and there's a place they came to camp. It was Iye Avarim. And that's a name that they have, right? It's a ruins, basically. And it's the east of Moab toward the sunrise. Now, Moab is here. This is the, let's see. This is the Dead Sea. And Moab will actually be here. These are the hills. These are the hills. And what we have here is, this is Edom. And when they passed through Edom, they came to the east of Moab, and this is Moab. And so they are probably on this side, yeah, on this side. And this is east. And this is where the sun rises, right? The sunrise, so east. So that's possibly likely where they are. And so from there, they moved and camped in the valley of Zared. And from there, they moved and camped on the other side of Arnon, which is the wilderness that extends from the border of Amorites. And Arnon is the border of Moab, between Moab and Amorites. Now, where is this place? It is actually fairly high up. This is with the Amorites. The Amorites is the delineating line, right? Now we have here Ammon. Or maybe not quite there, right? Maybe it's here, Ammon. And so they were continuing up this journey, and it came to a point where it is the border of Moab and the Amorites. Now remember the Amorites. The Amorites was what God had promised Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, that in the fourth generation, they will return to this place when the sins of the Amorites are complete. At that point in time, the sins of the Amorite is not fulfilled. And so all of these is written in the book of wars of the Lord. So there is a book which we don't have today. At least we don't see it. This is literally called how should we say, the wars, the book of wars of God, right? Book of wars of God. Now maybe I should just change this. And the word here would be this: and what he gave at Suf, which is the Red Sea. And whatever was at the Red Sea is described in this particular instance, also called the brooks of the Arnon. They are there at Arnon. So what is particularly there at the Arnon? Something incredible, something incredible. And it's a natural event as well. Now at the Red Sea, the magical event, well, I call it magical event, is the parting of the Red Sea. Here in Arnon, at the border of Moab, where they are facing the Amorites, God again did something major. God did something major. At this place, the slope of the brooks that reaches the dwelling of Ar, that lies on the border of Moab. From there, they went to Beerah, which is the well. The well is actually a hole in the ground. And God said to Moses, gather the people together and I will give them water. What happened is that this particular well, right? They went to Beer and the well there, it gave them water, no longer the rock. It is from the well. So what you find is when you've got a hole, the hole is deep inside and it has passed a water table and the water will gush up. This is the kind of well where you've got underground source or spring. Like the Gihon spring, it has so much power to push the water up the Temple Mount. So now they are happy. Israel sang this song, right? Spring up, oh well, all of you sing to it. The leaders sang. It was dug by the nation's nobles, by the lawgiver with their staves. And so this is where the people now realize that God is truly God. And the well was dug by the leaders, and the well had water coming up. And from the wilderness, they went to Matana. And from Matana, they went to Nahaliel. And from Nahaliel to Bamot. And from Bamot into the valley that is in it says country. This would be the open field of Moab at the top of Pisgah that looks down on the Yeshimon. This would be the name. Yeshimon, which is translated as wasteland. So number of places there that they can camp there. From here on in verse 21, please refer to Deuteronomy chapter 2, when Moses recounted this incident. Now, we are still on the eastern shore of the Jordan. Moses is there with the Israelites. They have passed Edom, Moab, Ammon, and they are here at the edge of the land of the Amorites. The king is King Sihon. And they send messengers, and this is the style. Whenever you are unsure, you send some messengers. And remember what we said about messengers. Messengers represent who sent them. And so it says, let me, the messenger says me, which means the nation of Israel, pass through your land. We will not turn aside into fields or vineyards. We will not drink any water from your wells. We will go by the king's highway, which is easier to travel, until we have passed through your territory. Verse 23. But Sihon would not allow Israel to pass like Edom. But Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel in the wilderness. And he comes in verse 23 to in verse 23, you find he came to this place in the wilderness called Yatzah. Now, this is a name which is not properly translated. It should be Yatzah. Right? Yatzah. And they fought against Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, we see that God told Moses that the land after Ammon would be given to them. Why? Because God gave the land of Edom to the Edomites. God gave the land of Moab to the Moabites. God gave the land of Ammon to the Ammonites. All these are relatives and cousins of the Israelites. But way after would be the Amorites, the land of the Amorites. And God says, I will give you these lands. And then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword, took possession of his land from the Arnon to the Yabok. And I guess you could say that they were highly, highly successful. As far as the people of Ammon, for the border of Ammon was fortified, and they were able to take cities with walls. Now, in the Bible, when you talk about cities with walls, it means that the Israelites, when they build walls, it means they trust themselves to defend and not God. In these cases, they trusted themselves and not God. And so Israel took all these cities and they dwelt in all the cities of Amorites, in Heshbon and all its villages. So now we go back to the first few verses, and the word haram should be viewed as consecrated, set apart for themselves. They didn't go to destroy the cities. They took the cities to live in them. And so that is why I was suggesting when it comes to people, they will kill and destroy and make to ruin. When it came to the city itself, they would set it apart for themselves to live. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, the king of Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab. And remember, the king of Moab is a friend of Israel right now, and taken all his land from his hand as far as Arnon, meaning the king of Moab lost this part of the land. And when you lose the land, you lose it permanently. And now Israel took it back. Israel took it back, and it belongs to Israel now. So it says, come to Heshbon, let it be built. To the city of Sihon, it would be repaired. Now, the idea here is not really repaired. It means cause to be established. Which means that now the city that was for the king of Sihon is to be redesignated to be a city of the Israelites. Now, verse 28 is the divine episode. In this last segment here, we can see what happened in that fight with the king of Sihon. It says here that a fire went out from Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. Remember, this would be an A and a B. This is about a fire, a flame. So fire, right? Which looks like flame, which is sent out from the place called Heshbon. It consumed, and the word consumed means to eat. So God is a consuming fire, so the fire would eat up everything that is in its path. And so this fire ate up Ar of Moab, the lords of the heights of the Arnon. Now, in this case, when it says it consumed, this implies a full destruction. Full destruction. It says, woe to you, Moab, you have perished, O people of Chemosh. This is the name of the idol or the false god. He has given his sons as fugitives, his daughters into captivity to Sihon, king of the Amorites, because Moab lost to Sihon. Next, in verse 30, but we have shot at them. Heshbon perished as far as Divon. We laid waste as far as Nophah, which reaches to Medibah. All of this is about conquer. Now, it doesn't say very much about how it was conquered, but it just told us where they conquered. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 32 did give us a bit more glimpse. So what we have here is a record of them obeying God and taking land that God has given them. And thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. Now Moses sent spy to this place here in verse 31. Verse 32. It is Yatzer. Yatzer, and they went to take its villages and drove out the Amorites who were there. So this conquer is successful. Right? This is important because they didn't fight the they didn't fight the Moabites, they fought the Amorites. After they were successful against Sihon, they continued and went up by the way to Bashan. Bashan is further up now on the northeastern border, coastal area of the Galilee. And the king there is by name of Og. Right? The name of Og, right? Og. The king of Bashan, and they went out against them and all his people at the battle of Edrei. Right? That's mega battle. The Lord said to Moses, do not fear him. When you want to fear God. I have given him into your hands with all his people and his land, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. So look at what Haram does. Haram will leave no survivors. This is destroy. Haram will also means take possession of the land. And this would mean set apart. And so from this same word, there are two facets of it. They don't want the enemies to stay with them. And so they destroyed them and they took over the city so they have a place to live. So they defeated him, his sons, all his people, until no survivor was left. And then they took possession of his land. This is about Sihon. And you should be familiar now that we have covered Deuteronomy chapter 2. And very distinctly, Moses was part of this conquest. Moses did not enter into the promised land because of what he did with unbelief last week. But now he does get a taste of conquest, where the conquest was successful, taking over the land of King Sihon and King Og. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.